It was dark, cold, and eerily quiet at the edge of the landfill, with only the faint glow of the city lights on the horizon. A figure stumbled out of a car, dragging what looked like a lifeless body toward the ditch. Cheyenne's hands trembled as she loosened the braided black belt still wrapped around Brittany's neck. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. She dropped Brittany by the roadside, quickly glanced around to ensure no one was watching, and then drove off into the night, leaving behind the broken remains of what was once her best friend. As her taillights disappeared into the distance, a faint shimmer of hope flickered in the ditch. Brittany's fingers twitched. She wasn't gone. But the next morning, a passerby found Brittany lying there, unresponsive, her face battered, her body cold. The police were called, and soon the investigation began. By the time the detectives pieced together who Brittany was, the last clue they needed to solve the case was hiding in plain sight. A selfie posted to social media hours before the murder. In that photo, the braided black belt that became the murder weapon hung casually around Cheyenne's waist, just another accessory on a night of partying. How could a friendship go so wrong? What led to that chilling night? Let's go back to the beginning, to a time when Brittany and Cheyenne were inseparable, when no one could imagine the horrors that lay ahead. Brittany was an 18-year-old high school senior with dreams bigger than her small town in Saskatoon. She worked 2 part-time jobs, saved every penny, and talked constantly about going to college to study hospitality. She wanted to work in fancy hotels one day, maybe even travel the world. Everyone loved Brittany, her teachers, her coworkers, and even the kids she babysat for extra cash. She was sweet, hardworking, and optimistic about the future. Then there was Cheyenne, 21, wild and unpredictable. Her reputation around town wasn't great, to say the least. She'd been in and out of trouble since she was a teenager, with over 50 convictions for shoplifting, theft, and other petty crimes. Rumors swirled about her drug use, and her temper was as infamous as her record. Yet somehow Brittany saw past all of that. To her, Cheyenne was misunderstood, a diamond in the rough who just needed someone to believe in her. Brittany defended Cheyenne when others called her bad news, insisting she was a good person deep down. The 2 girls met at a school event a few years earlier and hit it off instantly. Despite their differences, they became best friends. They were always together, shopping, going to parties, and sharing their dreams for the future. Brittany's family worried about the influence Cheyenne had on her, but Brittany brushed off their concerns. "You just don't know her like I do," she'd say. One Friday night, the girls decided to have a night out on the town. They planned to hit a few bars, maybe a house party, and just enjoy themselves. It wasn't unusual for them to drink together, though Brittany often tried to keep things light while Cheyenne sometimes went overboard. The night started innocently enough. Brittany and Cheyenne got dressed up, did their hair and makeup, and posed for a selfie before heading out. In the photo, Brittany smiled brightly, her youthful energy shining through. Beside her, Cheyenne smirked confidently, a black braided belt slung around her waist. Brittany posted the picture to her Facebook page with a cheerful caption, and within minutes, friends were liking and commenting on it. Their first stop was a popular bar downtown. They laughed, danced, and took more photos, their spirits high as the drinks flowed. From there, they headed to a house party, where the night took a wilder turn. Drinks were passed around freely, and someone offered them drugs. Brittany hesitated, but Cheyenne was all in, convincing her to join in. Soon, both girls were drunk and high, the lines between fun and recklessness beginning to blur. Around 4:30 a.m., the 2 ended up at a McDonald's parking lot, their energy fading, but their intoxication still in full swing. Cheyenne was trying to make a call, her speech slurred as she fumbled with her phone. Brittany, perhaps in a playful or protective mood, snatched the phone from her, laughing. Cheyenne wasn't laughing. Her mood shifted in an instant. "What are you doing?" "Give it back," she snapped, reaching for the phone. Brittany held it out of her reach, giggling, not realizing she'd crossed a line. Cheyenne's frustration grew into anger. The argument escalated quickly, their voices loud enough to draw stares from others in the parking lot. Then, in a flash, Cheyenne lost control. She shoved Brittany, who stumbled back, and before anyone could intervene, things spiraled into violence. Cheyenne hit Brittany once, twice, 3 times, her rage boiling over. Brittany tried to fight back, but Cheyenne overpowered her. In the chaos, Cheyenne yanked the braided belt from her waist, wrapped it around Brittany's neck, and pulled tight. Brittany gasped and struggled, clawing at the belt, but Cheyenne didn't let go. When she finally loosened her grip, Brittany lay still, her body limp. Panic set in. Cheyenne looked around, realizing what she'd done. Brittany wasn't moving. In a haze of fear and intoxication, Cheyenne dragged her friend to the car, dumped her in a back seat, and sped off into the night. She didn't know where to go or what to do. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making sense. She drove to her aunt's house, desperate for help, but her aunt took one look at Brittany's bruised and battered body and told Cheyenne to leave. Feeling more lost and panicked than ever, Cheyenne drove to the outskirts of town and left Brittany by the side of the road near the landfill. She couldn't face the truth of what had happened. She couldn't admit that her best friend was gone. But was she gone? As the car disappeared into the distance, Brittany's chest rose and fell faintly. She was alive, but barely. Would someone find her in time? Would she survive the night? The answers to these questions would soon unravel in ways no one could predict. The sun rose over Saskatoon, casting long shadows over the still streets. Near the landfill, a jogger noticed something unusual in the ditch, what looked like a person lying motionless. At first, he thought it was someone passed out after a rough night, but as he got closer, his stomach sank. Brittany lay crumpled on the ground, her face swollen, her neck bruised, her body cold to the touch. Her clothes were dirty, torn in places, and blood was dried on her skin. The jogger immediately called the police, and within minutes, the area was swarming with officers and investigators. Paramedics arrived and confirmed what everyone feared. Brittany was gone. They covered her body with a sheet and began to secure the scene. Nearby, an officer found a braided black belt lying on the ground, partially hidden in the tall grass. It seemed ordinary at first, but the marks on Brittany's neck made its significance clear. It was the weapon used to end her life. Detective Clara Edwards, a seasoned investigator, was assigned to the case. As she surveyed the scene, she noted the inconsistencies. Brittany's position suggested she'd been moved here, not killed on the spot. The bruises on her face and neck told a story of violence, but the lack of blood at the scene confirmed that this wasn't where the fight had happened. This was a dump site, and the killer had gone to great lengths to distance themselves from the crime. Who could do this to someone so young? Clara wondered aloud, shaking her head. She wasn't one to get emotional on the job, but seeing Brittany's body, her youth, her innocence, it was hard not to feel a pang of sadness. Back at the station, detectives began piecing together Brittany's identity. Her wallet, found in her pocket, provided her name and address. By midday, officers were knocking on her family's door. Brittany's parents were devastated when they heard the news. Her mother collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, while her father tried to stay composed for his wife and their younger children. They couldn't fathom why anyone would want to hurt Brittany. She was such a good kid, her mother wept. She didn't deserve this. As investigators delved into Brittany's life, they discovered the selfie she'd posted on Facebook just hours before her death. The picture showed Brittany smiling with her friend Cheyenne. It was time-stamped at the beginning of their night out. Clara knew that whoever had been with Brittany that night was the key to solving the case. Cheyenne, meanwhile, was waking up at home, groggy and hungover. Her head pounded as she tried to piece together the events of the night before. She remembered drinking, laughing, and dancing, but everything after the McDonald's parking lot was a blur. Her phone was gone, and that only added to her growing anxiety. As she scrolled through her Facebook feed, she saw Brittany's selfie and the comments pouring in. People were asking if Brittany had made it home safe, expressing concern over her silence. Cheyenne decided to play along, posting on Brittany's wall, "Hope you're okay. Text me when you see this. I need my phone back." Hours later, when rumors began swirling about Brittany's death, Cheyenne felt her stomach drop. She couldn't bring herself to admit what she'd done, not even to herself. Instead, she kept up appearances, posting heartfelt messages on Brittany's page about how much she missed her. She even wrote, "I can't believe you're gone. I wish I could visit you in heaven." Detectives quickly turned their attention to Cheyenne. The timeline of events, combined with her close relationship to Brittany, made her a person of interest. When they visited her home to question her, Cheyenne acted surprised, even distraught. She claimed she had no idea what had happened to Brittany. She spun a story about how they'd been out at a party, met a guy, and then parted ways. Brittany had left with a guy, she claimed, while she'd gone to her uncle's house to crash for the night. But Clara wasn't buying it. Something about Cheyenne's demeanor felt off. And when investigators checked the surveillance footage from the Colonial Pub and Grill, the place Cheyenne said they'd been, they found no sign of either girl. Nor did her uncle corroborate her alibi. The case hit a roadblock. While Cheyenne's lies made her look guilty, there wasn't enough physical evidence to tie her to the crime. Investigators needed more, something undeniable that would connect her to Brittany's death. As days turned into weeks, Cheyenne began to believe she might get away with it. But what she didn't count on was her own carelessness. The rumor mill in Saskatoon was relentless, and it wasn't long before someone came forward with a damning piece of information. Cheyenne's aunt, who had seen her with Brittany's lifeless body in the car that night, told a friend what had happened. That friend, horrified, went to the police. Now detectives had a new lead. They brought Cheyenne in for questioning again, this time armed with the aunt's testimony. Under pressure, Cheyenne began to crack. Her story shifted, and she admitted that she and Brittany had argued that night, but she insisted she hadn't killed her. She was alive when I left her, Cheyenne claimed, her voice trembling. Detective Clara didn't believe her, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't hold her. Cheyenne walked out of the station that day, her head held high, confident she'd outsmarted the cops. But Clara wasn't about to give up. She and her team pored over every detail of the case, determined to find the smoking gun that would bring Brittany's killer to justice. And then, 2 years later, Clara's persistence paid off. While reviewing the case file for the 100th time, she came across the selfie Brittany had posted that fateful night. For the first time, she looked closely at Cheyenne's outfit. The braided black belt around her waist was unmistakable. It was the same belt found at the crime scene. It was the proof they needed. With this new evidence in hand, the detectives arrested Cheyenne and charged her with second-degree murder. She denied everything at first, but when faced with the mounting evidence, she took a plea deal. Cheyenne confessed to killing Brittany in a fit of rage, agreeing to a reduced charge of manslaughter in exchange for a lighter sentence. As Cheyenne sat in her prison cell, serving her 7-year sentence, she had plenty of time to reflect on that night. Meanwhile, Brittany's family continued to grieve the loss of a bright, beautiful young woman whose life was cut tragically short. The black braided belt, once an accessory on a carefree night out, had become a symbol of betrayal, violence, and justice. For Detective Clara Edwards, it was a bittersweet victory, a reminder that even the smallest details could unravel the darkest secrets. The courtroom was packed the day Cheyenne's trial began. Reporters jostled for space in the back, while Brittany's family sat quietly in the front row, their faces etched with pain and determination. Cheyenne, now 23, sat at the defendant's table, her expression a mix of defiance and discomfort. She knew she was in trouble, but her bravado hadn't faded entirely. To those who didn't know her, she looked composed. To those who did, it was clear she was falling apart inside. The prosecution opened with a stark recounting of the crime, painting a picture of a night that had gone horribly wrong. They described Brittany as a bright, promising young woman with dreams of a better life, contrasted with Cheyenne's troubled past. They laid out their evidence piece by piece. The testimony from Cheyenne's aunt, the inconsistencies in Cheyenne's statements, and most damning of all, the black braided belt seen in the selfie and found at the crime scene. As the prosecution spoke, a hush fell over the courtroom. The story they wove was chilling, and when they displayed the selfie on a large screen, the air grew heavier. Brittany's smile seemed to glow from the photograph, her innocence and optimism frozen in time. Next to her, Cheyenne smirked, oblivious to the tragedy that lay ahead. This belt, the prosecutor said, holding it up for the jury to see, wasn't just an accessory. It became a weapon. A weapon Cheyenne used to strangle the life out of her best friend. Cheyenne's defense attorney, a wiry man named Peter Grayson, tried to paint a different picture. He argued that the events of that night were the result of poor decisions made under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He emphasized Cheyenne's intoxicated state, suggesting she hadn't intended to harm Brittany and had acted impulsively in the heat of the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, pacing the courtroom, "this is not a case of premeditated murder. This is a tragic accident, one that Cheyenne deeply regrets. She's not a monster. She's a flawed young woman who made a terrible mistake." But the evidence told a different story. Witness after witness testified about Cheyenne's volatile temper, her history of violent outbursts, and her reckless behavior. Brittany's family members tearfully described how much she was loved and how deeply her loss had affected them. Her younger sister, barely 14, took the stand and spoke about how Brittany had always protected her, even when life was tough. The jury hung on every word. As the trial progressed, details of the crime came into sharper focus. Forensic experts explained how the bruising on Britney's neck matched the belt perfectly. Toxicology reports revealed the high levels of drugs and alcohol in both girls' systems, supporting the argument that their judgment had been impaired. Surveillance footage from earlier in the night showed the two laughing and dancing at the bar, a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly things had spiraled out of control. Cheyenne's own behavior after the murder worked against her. The prosecution highlighted her decision to drive to her aunt's house instead of seeking medical help for Britney. They brought up her bizarre Facebook posts, which came across as insincere and calculated. "Hope you got home safe," one post read, written after Britney had already been found dead. The jury wasn't buying it. The tension in the courtroom reached its peak when a prosecutor played a recording of Cheyenne's second police interview. In the audio, her voice cracked as she stumbled over her lies. She admitted to parts of the story but downplayed her role, insisting Britney had started it and that she hadn't meant for things to go so far. "I was just so mad," Cheyenne said in the recording, her voice barely above a whisper. "She wouldn't give me my phone back, and I don't know what came over me." The prosecutor seized on this, pointing out that Cheyenne's anger had turned deadly and that her actions after the fight showed a clear attempt to cover up her crime. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, the prosecutor argued. This was a series of deliberate choices that led to Britney's death. As the trial neared its conclusion, both sides gave their closing arguments. The prosecution urged the jury to hold Cheyenne accountable for her actions, emphasizing the pain she had caused Britney's family and the community. The defense pleaded for leniency, asking the jury to consider Cheyenne's troubled upbringing and the circumstances of that night. After several days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Cheyenne was found guilty of manslaughter, a lesser charge than second-degree murder, but still a significant one. The courtroom was silent as the judge handed down her sentence, 7 years in prison, with a possibility of parole after 4. Britney's family felt a mix of relief and disappointment. They were glad Cheyenne would face consequences, but the sentence felt far too short for the life that had been taken. Britney's mother spoke to reporters outside the courthouse, her voice trembling with emotion. "We just want people to remember Britney for who she was," she said. "She was kind, hardworking, and full of dreams. She didn't deserve this." For Cheyenne, prison was a sobering experience. Gone was the bravado she displayed during the trial. Behind bars, she had time to reflect on the choices she'd made and the life she'd taken. She wrote letters to Britney's family, apologizing and expressing regret, but they never responded. For them, no apology could bring Britney back. Meanwhile, Detective Clara Edwards continued to work tirelessly on other cases, but the memory of Britney's case stayed with her. It was a reminder of the importance of persistence, of paying attention to the smallest details, and of the human cost of violence. For the people of Saskatoon, Britney's story became a cautionary tale, a tragic example of how quickly things can go wrong and how one moment of anger can destroy so many lives. And for Cheyenne, it was a lesson learned far too late. Her freedom, her future, and her friendship with Britney were all gone, lost to the darkness of that fateful night. Life moved on in Saskatoon, but the shadow of Britney's death lingered. Her family tried to piece their lives back together, though the emptiness left by her absence was impossible to fill. Her mother turned Britney's room into a small memorial, filling it with her favorite things, her prom dress, photos of her with her siblings, and even her neatly folded work uniforms. Every time she stepped inside, it felt like Britney was still there, her dreams frozen in time. The community, shaken by the tragedy, rallied around the family. Fundraisers were held to set up a scholarship in Britney's name for young women pursuing careers in hospitality, an effort to honor the dreams she never got to fulfill. At the first award ceremony, Britney's father stood before the crowd, tears in his eyes, and said, "If Britney were here, she'd be so proud of all of you. Keep chasing your dreams, because that's what she would have done." Cheyenne, on the other hand, struggled to adapt to life behind bars. The reality of her actions weighed heavily on her. At night, she was haunted by Britney's face, her smile in the selfie they'd taken, her laughter echoing in her mind, and finally, the lifeless expression she saw in the rearview mirror as she drove away. In prison, she joined a substance abuse program, finally acknowledging her addiction and the role it played in her destructive behavior. She also attended anger management classes, though the progress was slow. She was surrounded by others who had made irreversible mistakes, and for the first time, she understood the full gravity of what she'd done. Cheyenne wrote in a journal every day, pouring out her regrets and memories of her friendship with Britney. She held on to their happier moments, dancing at parties, sharing secrets, laughing until they cried. Those memories were her only solace in the monotony of prison life. 4 years into her sentence, Cheyenne was granted parole. When she walked out of the gates, the world felt unfamiliar. Saskatoon had changed, and so had she. She moved in with a distant cousin in another part of Canada, trying to start over. She got a job at a diner, keeping to herself and avoiding any reminders of her old life. But Brittany was never far from her thoughts. On the anniversary of Brittany's death, Cheyenne visited her grave for the first time. She brought a small bouquet of daisies, Brittany's favorite flowers, and stood silently, staring at the headstone. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I think about you every day. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person, even if it's too late for us." Brittany's family never reached out to Cheyenne. For them, forgiveness wasn't possible. Not yet, maybe not ever. But they found comfort in their memories of Brittany and in the lives she continued to touch through the scholarship fund. Each recipient carried a piece of her legacy, ensuring that her name lived on in a positive way. Detective Clara Edwards, now retired, often thought about the case. She kept a copy of the selfie in her files, a reminder of how one seemingly ordinary detail could change everything. For her, it was a symbol of persistence, of how justice could prevail even when the odds seemed stacked against it. As the years passed, the story of Brittany and Cheyenne faded for headlines, but those who knew them would never forget. It was a tale of dreams and betrayal, of anger and regret, of lives shattered and lessons learned too late. In the end, Brittany's memory became a beacon of hope for those who knew her, while Cheyenne's story served as a stark warning of how a single moment of rage could destroy everything. Though their lives had taken tragically different paths, they would remain intertwined forever, their story a reminder of the fragility of trust and the enduring impact of the choices we make.